Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. He didn't say a word when he slipped beneath the sheets, just a subtle shift in the mattress, a breath caught between hesitation and need. I felt it instantly. The warmth of his chest pressed against my back like a confession too heavy to speak. My eyes stayed shut, every nerve aware, every inch of my skin suddenly listening. His breath, slow and controlled, ghosted over the curve of my neck, close enough to stir the fine hairs, close enough to make my pulse betray me. We hadn't touched like this before. Not really. But the signs had always been there. The way his eyes lingered just a second too long when I reached for a glass. How my name sounded different when he said it alone, away from others. We moved around each other like orbiting planets, drawn close, but always just out of reach. Until now. I could feel the hesitation in him, how he was caught between retreating and staying right there. There was no rush in him, only wait. A question he didn't ask out loud but asked with every breath against my skin. And I frozen, still, pretending sleep while my body lit up like a struck match, had no answer I was ready to give. What we were was complicated. What we could be was dangerous. The word stepmom carries weight even when the years blur lines and blood isn't the bond that ties us. But tonight, none of that felt clear. Just warmth. Breath. A moment stretched thin with tension, waiting to break. He didn't move again. He just stayed there, inches from a choice. And I, caught between reason and want, stayed silent, except for the way my breath betrayed me. Faster now. Shallower. We were on the edge of something unspoken, something neither of us dared name. But in that stillness, every beat of his heart against my back asked if I'd let this moment go, or let it change everything. His breath was steady now, but too close. I could feel every slow exhale on my neck, each one drawing invisible lines across my skin. My heartbeat was betraying me again, too loud, too fast. I wondered if he could hear it, if he knew I wasn't asleep. But I didn't move. Not yet. Then came the shift. His hand, tentative, unsure, brushed the blanket between us. He didn't touch me. Not directly. Just a soft graze of the sheet, a ghost of contact. But it was enough. My fingers curled under the pillow. My chest tightened with the effort to stay still. "Are you awake?" he whispered. I didn't answer. Couldn't. If I spoke, my voice would crack open everything. I wasn't ready for that. And maybe he wasn't either. He pulled in a breath like he regretted asking, like the air itself was too heavy to carry now. And then, after a long silence, I felt him lean in just slightly, not touching, but close enough that his voice vibrated softly through the space between us. "I didn't mean to wake you," he said. Still, I stayed quiet. A part of me hoped he'd pull away, that this would pass like a fever. Another part prayed he wouldn't. He started again, then stopped. His voice was different now, lower, softer, almost careful. "It's not supposed to feel like this." No, it wasn't. But it did. A slow ache bloomed in my chest, tight and tender. I opened my eyes but didn't turn. I couldn't. Because if I did, if our eyes met right now, something would give. Something would change. And neither of us would be able to take it back. Then I felt it, his fingers brushed the curve of my arm, featherlight, as if asking for permission without words. I didn't pull away. Seconds stretched. My breath shallow. His hand stilled. I finally whispered, "You should go back to your room." It hurt to say it. The words scratched my throat on the way out. But they needed to exist, because the space between us was already burning. He didn't move. Not right away. "I will," he murmured. "I just needed to be near you. Just for a minute." And somehow, that minute lasted forever. His fingers hovered for a moment longer, still not touching, still not gone. I could feel the electricity between us like a wire pulled tight, humming just beneath the surface. My skin ached for the contact, and yet I didn't move. I couldn't. Because if I turned into that moment, I wouldn't be able to turn back. He let his hand fall to the mattress, brushing the edge of mine. It was so casual it could have been an accident, but it wasn't. I knew it. So did he. And in that slight touch, I felt all the things he couldn't say out loud. His voice was barely audible. I think about you. More than I should. The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy, slow to fade. I closed my eyes tighter, as if darkness could protect me from truth. This isn't fair, I whispered, not sure if I was saying it to him or to myself. No, he said. It's not. We lay like that, still, tangled in the silence. Every breath between us pressed closer to something dangerous. It wasn't just want, it was something deeper, something slower and harder to shake. It scared me. He shifted slightly, and I felt his forehead rest gently against the back of my shoulder. Not a kiss. Not a move. Just closeness. A quiet surrender. I know I'm not supposed to feel this way, he said. But I don't know how to stop. A lump rose in my throat. My hand trembled against the sheet, and I almost reached for his. Almost. You don't understand, I murmured. You don't know what this would cost. I do, he said. That's why I haven't done anything. That truth struck deeper than I expected. Because he hadn't. He'd stayed still. Gentle. Careful. Even now, with heat between us thick as smoke, he hadn't crossed the line. Not really. But we were close. So close it hurt. I turned slightly, just enough to see him out of the corner of my eye. His gaze met mine, wide open, unguarded. For one breathless second, we just looked at each other, the world narrowing to the space between our mouths. And then I looked away. Because the feeling was too big. Too raw. And because wanting him didn't make it right. The silence wrapped around us like a second blanket, thick, stifling, trembling with everything we weren't saying. I could hear his breathing shift, deeper now, uneven, as if just lying this close was too much to bear. My back burned with awareness, every inch of me alert to the space between us, so narrow it barely existed, so charged it felt like it might ignite. I turned, slowly, cautiously, facing him in the dark. He was already looking at me. Our faces were inches apart. The shadows softened him, but his eyes, they were sharp, aching, holding something he'd been swallowing for too long. His jaw tensed. His lips parted. But he said nothing. Neither did I. Instead, I reached up, without thinking, without planning, and touched his face. Just my fingertips on his cheek. But it was everything. The heat of his skin, the stubble beneath my hand, the way he leaned into the touch like it was the first breath he'd taken in hours. We both exhaled. His hand came up, slowly, deliberately, and closed around my wrist, not to stop me, not to pull me closer, just to hold me there. Like he needed proof this moment was real. I can't keep pretending, he whispered. His voice cracked. Not loud, not desperate, just true. My throat tightened. I searched his face, trying to find the version of him I could resist. But I couldn't see it. All I saw was everything I'd tried to deny. And it was staring back at me, wide open and bare. You think I haven't felt it too? I whispered. His thumb brushed my wrist, barely there, but enough to send a current through my whole body. For a second, we just breathed. Together. Timed. Like our hearts were trying to find the same rhythm. He leaned in. Just a fraction. Not a kiss. Not yet. But close enough for his breath to hit my lips. My eyes fluttered shut. Not because I wanted to escape, but because I wanted to fall. And then he stopped. No words. No motion. Just his forehead against mine, both of us shaking from everything that almost happened. Everything still waiting in the air. We didn't move. Because sometimes the almost is louder than the act. Her breath found his before her words did, a small, humid offering carried under the hush of rain against the window. The room smelled of warm sheets and wet pavement, a steady patter that wrapped the world outside into private sound. Light from the lamp pooled soft and golden, catching the curve of his shoulder and the line of her collarbone. For a long moment they only listened, to the rain, to the quiet settling of their own breath next to one another, to the small steady thing that had grown between them like a secret houseplant, slow, inevitable, impossible to ignore. He reached for her with the economy of someone who had learned patience, not a grasp, but a motion that asked permission of the air. His hand landed at the small of her back and stayed there like punctuation. She leaned into it without thinking, her spine answering him like a sentence completed. Their bodies fit in the way of two people who had mapped each other's edges in thought for months, but had never been allowed the space to trace those lines for real. Outside, the rain deepened. Inside, the light thinned to amber. She turned, slow, as if rearranging a dream, and his face in the lamp's glow looked like a map she suddenly recognized. He held her gaze until her defenses dissolved, not in a dramatic rush, but like fog lifting from a lake. When their hands met, it was at first a question, and then quickly an answer, fingers threading, palms resting, skin to skin like a language finally learned. Her breath melted into his, warm and steady, an intimate punctuation that said everything they had been too careful to say aloud. They moved together the way memory sometimes moves, unplanned, luminous. There were no loud declarations, no confessions that needed to be aired. The air between them simply shifted, rearranged by proximity and permission. His forehead rested against hers. Her hand splayed against the back of his neck, feeling the little hitch of a pulse that sounded alarmingly like relief. Their bodies spoke the words they could not find. I have waited, I am here, I choose you. Heat rose in the room, not coarse, but deep and deliberate, gathered in small breaths and the slow travel of fingertips across familiar planes. It was an intimacy of textures, the rough of his sleeve, the softness at her temple, the quiet press of skin that was more prayer than possession. Time bowed to them. Outside, the rain softened to a hush. Inside, the hush became a kind of hymn. When at last they did what they had held off for, a movement that was both surrender and offering, it felt less like a falling and more like arriving. The world outside the windows continued its quiet weathering, but here, in this lamplit corner, something else had been made, a roomful of held breaths finally released. They stayed in the exhale, limbs tangled, hearts unspooling, the night around them a soft witness to something carefully, fiercely true. Morning came quietly, but it didn't feel soft. The rain had stopped some time before dawn, leaving the world outside glazed and still. Light filtered through the curtains in strips, slicing across the bed like truth arriving too early. She was already awake, eyes open, staring at the ceiling like it might offer her a version of the night that ended differently, or not at all. He was beside her, closer than before, but somehow more distant. On his back, arms still barely touching hers, his face slack with sleep that looked like escape. She didn't know whether to move closer or further away. The silence wasn't cruel. It wasn't even awkward. It just held weight. Like both of them knew they had stepped across a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She sat up slowly, pulling the sheet with her, more out of habit than modesty. Her chest felt heavy, not with regret exactly, but with the ache of consequence. He stirred, turned his head toward her, hair a mess, eyes half-lidded. Hey, he said, quiet. Rough. She didn't answer right away. Her hands were in her lap, still. What now? She asked. Not angry. Not afraid. Just raw. He didn't have an answer. They stared at each other for a beat too long. His eyes searched her face like he was afraid to find what he was looking for. She looked away. I didn't expect to feel this, she said finally. What? His voice was barely above a whisper. This calm. And this panic. He nodded slowly, then sat up beside her. The bed creaked beneath the weight of their words. Before either of them could speak again, the sound of a key turning in the front door sliced through the stillness. They froze. She blinked, eyes wide. No one was supposed to be home until tomorrow. The door opened. A voice floated in, casual, unaware. Hey, I left my charger, just grabbing it. Footsteps. Getting closer. She shot him a look, warning, panic, fear. He grabbed his shirt off the floor. She pulled the sheet tighter. And in that moment, everything that had happened, every breath, Every whisper, every unspoken promise, suddenly felt fragile, suspended in a space that might not survive daylight. But still, when their eyes met again, there was something steady there. Not shame, not even regret. Just two people standing at the edge of something impossible and wondering if it might still be real. She found him in the kitchen hours later, after the visitor had gone and the air had settled like dust after a storm. He stood by the window, coffee in hand, eyes on the rain-washed street, wearing the same shirt he'd rushed to pull on earlier. Everything in the room was quiet, except her heart. He didn't turn when she walked in. He didn't need to. She was already part of the silence. "I thought you left," he said gently, like the idea had both terrified and prepared him. She shook her head. "I almost did." He looked at her then, slow, steady, and in his eyes was everything they hadn't said last night. Not lust. Not regret. Just the raw, honest truth of two people who had stepped across something tender and real and now stood in its afterglow. She crossed the room. Not fast. Just enough. Her fingers reached for his. He didn't pull away. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted, voice soft. He nodded. "Me either." Silence again, but different now. Less heavy. More alive. She leaned into him, her cheek brushing his chest. He set his cup down, arms wrapping around her like they'd been waiting for permission. No heat now, just warmth. Real, breathing, bone-deep warmth. His lips pressed softly to her forehead. Not as a question. As a promise. And in that moment, neither of them needed more. Not labels. Not answers. Just this. Because sometimes, love doesn't shout. It whispers. It stays in a quiet morning, in the feel of someone's breath near your temple. It stays in a choice, not to forget, not to run, but to be still and let something unfamiliar grow into something worth keeping. She closed her eyes. Let herself feel it all. The fear. The wonder. The quiet knowing that this might not be simple, but it could be something. And maybe that was enough. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a breath. "Let's not name it yet." He smiled into her hair. "Okay." And just like that, no dramatic ending, no goodbye, the story found its peace.